Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show Army Special Forces veteran Dewey Yopp. Now, in this conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from his journey into the military, his 9/11 experience, deployment to Afghanistan, Iraq, the selfless heroism of the indigenous people, bringing our Afghan allies back to the US, how current immigration policies are sending the very allies back to Afghanistan, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of almost 1,200 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I introduce to you Dewey Yopp. Enjoy. So Dewey, I want to start by saying thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, James.
So first question, where on planet Earth are we finding you this afternoon?
I'm in a small community in Vine Grove, Kentucky, between Fort Campbell and Fort Knox.
Brilliant. What's the weather been like for you at the moment with this massive storm we're getting?
It's a little better. We got some sunshine today. We've had about almost 10 inches of snow. It's been below freezing. It was 7 degrees the other morning. Today was 17. So it looks like it might hang around the 20s today. It's not too bad.
Well, I want to start at the very beginning of your timeline. So tell me where you were born and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
All right. Well, I was born in Valdosta, Georgia, at Moody Air Force Base. My father was an enlisted man during the Korean War, and he went to OCS. He was an infantry branch, but he spent his career in Army aviation. My mother was a homemaker. She graduated from college, and I have one sibling, a sister, Teresa, lives in Hampton, Virginia. And we went to school in Hampton. Since I didn't have a father in the household, I had a really great aunt and uncle that watched out for us. And I got to go to military school thanks to them. And I went to Fort Union Military Academy. I was there in the 7th grade through the junior high level. And then I finally begged my parents to let me out of there and graduate from a civilian high school. So at that point, I was in Northern Virginia, and I graduated from Wakefield High School in 1974. And shortly thereafter, I went into service into the Army.
You mentioned that your dad was in the Korean War. I think that's one of the most heartbreaking things about our recent military history is you have World War II where, arguably at least there was a lot of gratitude when people came home. And then, Vietnam War is thought of the other way, where people are being spit on and called baby killers when they come home, even though there was a massive draft for that as well. And in the middle, there's this group of men and women that went overseas, and if you look at there's a really good graphic that's out on the internet, how close Korea got to being completely overrun and what the Allies did to push them back all the way to the middle point again. It really breaks my heart. I can't imagine being a veteran of that conflict when it's barely even acknowledged, what they did. So what were some of the stories or kind of reflections you had from your father's service?
He didn't talk much about the Korean War, to be honest. He did speak to me on a few occasions about his time in service in Vietnam. He flew an OV-1 Mohawk. It's a reconnaissance aircraft, but it was outfitted with rockets. So they would do reconnaissance missions for special forces and MACV and the command elements down there, taking photographs and that type of thing. So his aircraft was shot up quite a bit, and it got a nickname of Old Yeller. I mean, it had so many bullet hole patches on it, and after a while they turned kind of a yellow color, so it just stuck. But he had, if I remember correctly, he had 10 air medals, so that's pretty impressive there with his combat time. That's an air medal's like the equivalent to a Bronze Star, I think, if I remember right. But yeah, his service there was twice. He went over early in the 60s, and his last tour was in the 1970. And he was the chief of safety for South Vietnam during that period of time for aviation.
Amazing. As we sit here now in 2026, the conversation about, the impact of service on our physical and mental health is, very, very different. And we're having a very progressive conversation these days. When you reflect back now with this kind of, mature lens that you have, were there any kind of impacts that you recognize in your father when you were young, as far as the impacts of war?
Oh, yes, I definitely do. I could, back then, the PTSD, that wasn't even, the acronym. I'd never heard of it. And those veterans kept it to themselves mostly. And sadly, a lot of them succumbed to alcohol and other substance abuses to find themselves or get relief. But, nowadays with the PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and being in environments where, you're put in situations where, the human mind has to react quickly and in a violent manner, and those things stick with you, hard to forget type experiences. And everybody has their own level of dealing with these things. And as a veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan, I can say that for me, it's been a long process getting back to finding myself again and getting interested in the things I do. But it's not an easy thing, and it's lifelong, and it's good to have support group. My family has been awesome through my progress with PTSD. I have CPTSD. I don't know if you ever heard of that. Complex, some people say, or it's chronic. But everybody has their own level and how to deal with those things. But there's opportunities and organizations out there that, we didn't have that when I was on active duty. These are things that have become more useful and prevalent in the community, with veterans and the VA and NGOs. As far as that goes, there's some really awesome NGOs out there that support veterans with PTSD.
It's interesting with the term complex PTSD, because the more I've learned over the last almost a decade now of conversations like this with not only people in uniform, but psychologists, psychiatrists, neuroscientists, is that it's a perfect storm of all the things. So you've got unaddressed childhood trauma, you've got sleep deprivation, but then as we're going to talk about later in this conversation, you've got organizational betrayal and moral injury, where organizations that you fought for, would die for, and now turn their back. So there are so many pieces to this puzzle. I think this is why we failed so miserably early on, because whether you're military or first responder, they're like, oh, it's what Dewey saw in war, or it's what James saw in a fire. But that's just a tiny part of it, and if you're not addressing all the other pieces, you're never going to get to the bottom of it.
That's exactly right, James.
So what about going back to your young years? What were you playing as far as sports and exercise?
I played football, baseball, and I got into martial arts later on when I was at military school, actually, and Taekwondo. I achieved black belt in Taekwondo, but those sports. Today, I love football. I just can't play it anymore. But I enjoy sports. Those were the activities I had growing up, and I love outdoors. I love to fish and hunt as well. Uh, it's a really relaxing to get on a lake or somewhere, or even on the shore, and just sit there, throw a line in the water. You don't even have to have bait on it. Just kick back and enjoy nature. But that's pretty much it. When I was a kid, I was fortunate enough. My mother's family had a huge farm down in the central part of North Carolina in Sampson County. So I'd go down there on the summer, and I'd stay all summer, 3 months down there, and I'd whatever was going on, picking watermelons, cotton. I wasn't all that hot picking cotton. That stuff cut you up, and I whined a lot. So I hung out in the shade and toted water to the real workers. But kind of lifestyle got me into that mindset, that country type living lifestyle. So that was a pleasure in my life. I think about it a lot. Still have good connections there in Sampson County. But yeah, it was an interesting childhood there. My mom, she worked in Newport News, Virginia, and she sewed linings and coffins. That's what she did for a living to support my sister and I. It's kind of unique too, James. I had a job when I was under the age of 16. I was a paper boy, and I had 200 papers I'd deliver every day before school. And I'd get my sister afterwards, and I'd ride her in the bicycle down to the elementary school. We were still in elementary school then. But, my sister and I are real tight to this day. She looks after my mother now. My mother just had a birthday on January 20th. She's 96. Still hanging tough, and Sis is keeping hold of her. So I'm blessed. I got good people in my life, James.
That's amazing. It's funny with the longevity conversation. When we were younger, I don't know, it just seemed like people lived till they were 60-ish. And here we are now, and we're just surrounded by people that have got this, amazing lifespan. My grandmother died a few weeks shy of 105. So,
wow.
This 40 is middle age. We need to rethink that, because you got a long way to go if you stay healthy. So
that's true. That's true. I hope so. I'm getting up there myself, James. So I got a birthday coming up next month.
I have two. When is yours? Which day?
13th.
Okay, mine is the 29th. I'll be 52.
Awesome. I got a daughter almost that age.
There we go. Well, going back to career-wise, you mentioned being in a military, school. Were you already dreaming of entering the military then, or was there something else in your mind at the time?
Not really. I think it had a lot to do with my drifting away from family and getting involved with hooligans there in the city. And my uncle wanted me to see what discipline was like. My grades were failing. All that changed once I got to military school. I made real good grades. I was a good little trooper and all that stuff. So, 4 years of that, and then I get out. I kind of was looking at what I could do and what was waiting on me there in Hampton. So for a while, I worked on scallop boats. That was real interesting, offshore scallop boats. And then, when I graduated from high school, that's the time period I'm talking about. Right at that time period, I worked on the ocean. Then I said, this is not really for me. So I joined the Army. And it's one of the best things I ever did. The Army really raised me.
Why the Army? Why that branch specifically?
I guess it had to do with my father, and it was odd. My father said, don't go in the Army, don't go airborne, don't go to these other schools and stuff. Just, you'll find your way, and the next thing he knew, I was at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, going through boot camp.
So talk to me about your on-ramp then. Were you already thinking about Special Forces, or did you just think a regular Army initially?
Yeah, regular Army. I went to jump school. I wanted to be airborne. My dad was a he was a paratrooper. So I kind of got into that. I really enjoyed that, being there, like I was in the 82nd for a little over a year, and they were building up. It was Camp Stewart, Georgia. It hadn't been named Fort Stewart then, but they had a Ranger detachment, some guys coming up recruiting, and they were asking them, in the division, they were getting volunteers to go down to fill up the battalion down there at Camp Stewart. So, don't volunteer, but I did. And so I ended up down at Camp Stewart, Georgia. I did some time down there, and I left there, and I went to Korea for a year. And when I got there, it was a big surprise too. They had I don't know if you remember the Operation Paul Bunyan, but they cut a tree down there on the border of North Korea and South Korea. It was blocking observation of North Korea, and they killed a major and his driver there. They were in a Jeep, but I was on GDP 115, and there was 116 was Collier and Olette. That's on the DMZ. So when that happened, the whole division's on alert. So I got a little taste of seeing what, conflict could be like, and actually seeing, the aftermath of the things that occurred during that day. So afterwards, I started looking at trying to get into a field that I could, enjoy and do the things that I like to do. So I'd gone to a few LERP schools, and what's the other one is a survival, escape, and evasion, those types of things. And then from there, I just went on to different parts of my career, and it's led me into the special operations side of the house. And that's been a real eye-opener for me, meeting the people I got to meet in my life, some outstanding heroes out there, unknown to the rest of the world, but they're giants amongst our ilk. But real pleasure. I have a real good buddy that he was part of the 12 that first went over in 2021. So he's been very helpful. He's been helpful with me. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. He helped me with a situation we'll probably talk about here in a little bit, and it's really helped out, immensely. And I'm thankful that I've had people like that in my life.
What was it that allowed you to pass Special Forces selection when so many people rang the bell? Because one of the, I guess, myths that we have, if we don't know much about the military, is that you need to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger to run around to be Special Forces. But then you get them on the show. Rich Wright is a perfect example, one of the first Delta guys, Marcel, in Vietnam. His last deployment was Mogadishu, so you think about that career. But right. I mean, literally one of the nicest, kindest human beings that I know. Not physically intimidating. You'd think he was a school teacher or something, but at that time he's one of the most trained killers out there. So you hear, obviously it's not just about this giant physicality. So it's far more the mental side. So when people were ringing the bell, what allowed you to continue?
It's just determination. The wanting it bad enough. And I mean, I had to go twice, to be honest. I didn't get to graduate the first time, so I went around the second time. And, it's not an easy, as you know, and everybody else in the world, some of the things you see on the internet and those types of things are very challenging. And the mental breakdown of it is tremendous. Your mental attitude has to stay on point. And if you're injured, and at one point I tried to hide it. I had my left, I had a big issue with one of my tendons on my left leg. So I ended up having to get recycled again. And I had a cast on that leg, and I had some other things going on. But I ended up, I had to do the PT thing and all that again. But, just because it was a physical injury, and I got back in, and that's it.
So what about kind of, deployments or training pre 9/11? What did it look like before? Obviously things changed dramatically.
Well, prior to that, I mean, it was, we 9/11 really did, it opened up a lot of eyes across the Department of Defense and everything else we had going on then. But the training afterwards, we hadn't really, we had the jungle type guerrilla warfare. We'd been over to Iraq, which is, night and day when you get to a place like Afghanistan. It's 13th century living there, and, it's just two different places that you have to deal with, not only with the environment, but the type of, the culture and the people. And it just, it complicates a lot of things. So when you get involved in that, you go over there with a lot of information, but you haven't put it into any practical exercise that could truly be meaningful. You could discuss it and do sand tables and, mock operations and talk about this and that, but actually getting on the ground and getting there and see how that's going to work out is a whole different story, because there's going to be some concerns when your foot hits the ground and you're looking around for your contact and they don't show up. And, there you are. What you going to do then? So you have to think about these things, and, always have a plan B, C, and the extract, finally, if that's what it takes to stay alive.
So talk to me about 9/11, then we'll move forward. What was that day like for you specifically?
Well, I happened to be on leave in northern New Jersey, and a place called Verona, and I was with a friend of mine in a coffee shop, and all of a sudden the TV came on, people came in, and they said some planes hit the towers. And I went outside, and from that area in Verona, you can see down into New York. So we drove to a place it's 10 minutes away, and it's up on the high ground, and we could see the Twin Towers burning. You could see the smoke coming out of there. And then let me tell you, in that whole neighborhood there wasn't a person that wasn't on the street watching and listening and just in shock and awe of what was going on. So that's where I was. And then, of course, get back to the unit, and then, the folks that went over initially in 2001, and then from that time period, lessons learned and information exchanged to the rear for those coming back, going over, 2002 and whatever. Some of those guys, those 2021 guys, are 2002, the guys that went over first, they bounced to Iraq after a period of time. They had gone to Iraq, and other elements had taken over responsibilities, training, that type of thing on the ground in Afghanistan, for instance. We're talking about 9/11, and all the hoopla about Osama bin Laden being in Afghanistan, and being up in the Tora Bora and all that kind of stuff, and then ending up being in Pakistan all that time, is those types of things unfold, and you have people on the ground looking and hunting someone on that, caused this stuff. It can get in depth, with the personnel and intel you have.
So when you first land in Afghanistan, obviously we're going to talk a lot about the heroism of a lot of the Afghan people and what they did alongside the allied nations and what they risked, their families risked. What was the kind of first interaction for you with the allied, the Afghan people, and then some of the people that you started working alongside?
All right. When I arrived in country, I didn't come with an American entourage. I came as a civilian through the Kabul airport, and I was dressed in Afghan traditional attire for a male, polka hat and scarf and all that stuff. So I had a contact I was going to meet there at the airport. I had no clue what they looked like. All I knew is they had a little sign that had this 3 letters on it. So when I got there, there was a riot going on at the airport. But first, when we're landing, I'm looking out the plane window, and I'm not kidding you. You see, this is the old airport now. The new airport, it may be cleaned up now, but back then, there were Soviet aircraft fuselages crashed in the grass area of the airport. And we're landing, I'm looking at those things. They've been there, 10 years or more, and they're still there, untouched. And we're landing, I'm looking out the window, and I'm seeing vultures sitting on these lights on the runway. Some of the lights are blue, some are out, some are not, and there's these vultures hanging out. And I'm thinking to myself, oh yeah, nice. So I get into the airport, and it's total chaos in there. And I finally get to the front of the airport, and I see this young man standing there, and he's got a 3x5 card with these letters on it. That's my guy. So I get with him, and we push our way through the crowd, and there's a driver there. Both these guys are Afghan Pashtuns, and they're armed. And we get in this car, and we drive through Kabul, through Amasud Circle. We get to that point, there's a crane. There's a crane with a guy hanging by the neck from this crane. So I'm thinking, okay, and now we're going to a safe house. So I'm riding through there. We're talking. My cultural advisor and interpreter, I'm going to call him Amir. That's not his real name. But Amir's chatting it up with me, man. He just can't stand it. I'm an American. We're going to do these things, blah, blah, blah. And he's telling me, and I'm looking at him like, how long is it going to be before we get there? And I feel a little bit more safer. This is what I'm thinking. And he's trying to make me feel at ease and calm. So we finally get there, and it's outside of the city between Phoenix was the name of the compound. It was Phoenix, and the Kabul place there. There's a police station on the way, also a big police station. I ended up getting arrested. I spent a day in there, but I'll get to that anyway. So we get to the safe house, and it's an awesome place. It's got a big, huge, it's like a 20-foot wall, got iron gates. It's got a couple of dudes in the tower, and I find out later they're former Gurkhas that they're working for
the British.
Uncle Sam. Yeah. So anyway, I get in there and I meet the other folks there, and we discuss what's going to happen the next few days. It was really interesting. They had Connexes stacked on top of each other inside this compound, and it wasn't big at all, James. It was like 30 yards wide, 50 yards deep, and across the street there was a civilian market, kind of like a Sam's Club or something like that. You could get frozen food and coffee, that kind of stuff. I went in there twice, but anyway, but it was on the outskirts of the city. So anywhere I went and traveled, I did as a civilian. So I didn't have a lot of contact with the military people. I did at Camp Edwards, I had a cell of folks that I would brief up on who I thought was a bad guy, when I started working and mingling amongst the Afghan army. And, there's a lot of diversity there in the army as well. And, Hazara, Pashtun, etc. And then, so you have issues and concerns with, making sure you're staying on a good plane with everyone, regardless of their heritage or, their tribal affiliation. But that does come into play quite a bit, the affiliations that they have, and once you get outside the city of Kabul, the rest of the population, Kabul might as well be on the moon, bro, because they're not going to do any help. They're not going to help nobody. There's no way to reach them. It's just that they're on your own. So you got to have your own laws, that type of thing, and it's worked, but unfortunately, things didn't work out the way I thought they would, at least, after 20 years.
Talk to me about that tribal element, because I've had a lot of people on the show now, some Afghan and then many, from your community. And obviously hindsight is 2020, but one of the biggest, I guess, criticisms was that the mentality was almost like you had this country and it was unified, but when you actually got to Afghanistan, as you just alluded to, there's all these kind of micro tribes within the country itself.
Yeah, the biggest tribe is Pashtun, and then you have Hazaras, Zabekis, and Uzbekis. They all infiltrate their families, just like us. If you go over the border, marry a cousin, you end up living there, that type of thing. But those cultures and their family traditions and those things don't change, so they keep them up amongst their tribes, and each individual, and they affiliate from there's so many different tribal names you can get to, and it depends on what province you're from and where you live. But the dialects there, it's like, okay, British and English, like Farsi and Dari. That's what it would be like. We understand each other, but that accent's there a little bit, that type of thing. So you adjust that. And it's just, it takes a lot of effort and patience, especially in the training process. Something I learned when I first got over there about Afghan education was, it's limited. A lot of can't read or write and didn't know the birthdays, that type of thing. So it was an eye opener for me, and those things you work through. And then when you're training like that, you leave that out, but you can see still, those groups would hang out together and be together more, in that environment. Those soldiers I'm talking about, the diversity. So they would hang out with each other and everybody like that. But when, it was time to chill, they would be with their own people, So I got to say this, the most hospitable people I ever met in my life, James. I mean, didn't know me from Adam, traveling around with my, afoot or in a civilian vehicle, and just by word of mouth and from contacts from previous Afghan army commanders and general officers, their families. I stayed with the people like that when I would travel, and they would open their home up, the hot chai, the food, and they treated me like family. I mean, really, it just blew my mind, and I was like the treasure they found in the Cracker Jacks. The kids would all sit around, and it was just one of those things, it was a lot of interesting things that I experienced there in the job that I had. And it was something else.
Well, that's what I hear over and over again. I ask usually a two-part question, and in the other half, the first part is obviously, what the bad side was, who the people that you were hunting, what were the atrocities that people were seeing, because in the news you get a very kind of polarized perspective back home, which is either let God sort them all, kill them all, let God sort them out, or they're all baby killers. And obviously there's
right.
nuances in the middle. But over and over and over again, you heard, soldiers and airmen and all these people that were on the ground say it was like being back home. There was a dad fixing his car, and, mom was making dinner, and maybe that can be reversed in America, but, you get what I'm saying. And the kids were playing, and, it's the same human experiences that we want. So when we kind of paint the air quotes bad guy, and then these men and women in uniform find themselves on the ground. Yeah, of course, there are some horrific people, but you kind of get that tar everyone with the same brush, but they get down. And as you said, there's all these stories of kindness and compassion and courage from the men and women that they're there to protect.
Exactly. Yep. That's true. And when you actually see it, and amongst the horrific things that it's unavoidable, and it's those types of things stick with you. But when you see that humanity, that compassion that others have, and the interest, the curiosity, that type of thing, and then through that, you build a relationship, and then from there, and I still to this day, I have a good friend in Herat. It's near the border, and they've lived there their entire family. They got this home that has been there since eons. It goes back like 500 years. But that family I still am in touch with. They do produce. They have a produce market, so they do produce, apples, oranges, that kind of stuff, vegetables.
Just so we can set the scene on the other side, not only what our soldiers were facing, but also the immense danger to the Afghan people themselves. Talk to me about, the horrific people that were also in Afghanistan at this time.
There's, it's hard to put a finger on some of those characters. There's there's a handful of them dead, but all the prevalent ones now, and I spent a lot of time in Kandahar, and I tell you, that place is festering. It's just, it needs to, it's bad. And the atrocities that I witnessed, not the aftermath of these things that I saw, were just unbelievable. How a human being could do that to another human being is just beyond me. It's just sickening. But that type of thing goes on, and it has to do with that type of the barbaric 13th century mindset. The brutality. I mean, look what's going over there now. I mean, it's insane, the things they're getting away with over there, with the degradation of the society, and the women, the children. They're suffering so much, and it seems like everybody else, with going on. I call it a retreat, James. Once we retreated from Afghanistan, the whole world opened up, and we did witness what's going on now. Started out with Ukraine and Russia, and then it's Gaza, and so on and so forth. And then Africa's always been bad there, but that's getting worse and worse as time goes on. And now we got, on our side of the world now, Venezuela, South America again. I did a little time down that way with Uncle Ali back in the day, but I was only there for about a month, though, thank God. That's a miserable place. Talking about heat. Woo!
So with that being said, with that level of danger, and not just, losing your life, but we don't need to, get too graphic, but the things that you're talking about, the fear that strikes into the heart of people. Talk to me about then the courage that you witnessed from these Afghan people, whether they were fighting alongside you, whether they were interpreters, whether they were, whatever the role was, so that we can set the stage of what these men and women did for us, for the U.S. themselves.
Well, fortunately, I wasn't involved in a bunch of firefights, but I had a few, involved in one. We were coming back. I was at Camp Hero in Kandahar, and I left there to go to Kandahar City. Now, everybody talks about Kandahar and the airport and all that. That's American-built stuff there. When we talk about the city, that's north. I think it's like 10 Ks or a little more than that. Anyway, Kandahar City. So I went up there to buy a generator so we could run our little satellite stuff and do our deal. So I did buy a generator. On the way back, we got ambushed, and he killed the driver. And the place is full of Taliban. I mean, when we got there, you could see the black flags with, the Taliban signature on it and so on. And there's a Russian barracks there, an old Russian barracks. And that's where our contact was living then. were living there. So we'd gone there and got the generator, put it in the hoopty we were in. It was a old Opal of something. I think it was an Opal. And we were in that. Anyway, we got ambushed. The driver got killed. And then Amir and myself were the only ones there. So we got the generator out and drug it in this alley. And we talked to some people, and they secured it. We sent some guys there the next day, and we got the generator back. But we started on foot walking back towards Kandahar, the American air base there. And on the way, we noticed there was a firefight going on out there between the mountain range and the airport area. And it was an ANA unit out there in a gunfight with the Taliban. So I told Sam, I says, we're going to have to get some help because it's nighttime. Look at us. We're going to mess around and get zapped ourselves. So we took our time and we eased up within about, I'm going to say 100 yards of those guys. And they were busy. They had the spotlights on and stuff. They had the Ford Ranger trucks with these Soviet machine guns on top, just laying waste to this. It was like a rubble of a village there and stuff. There was a dead mule out there, or a donkey. There was a couple of small fires, and just constant automatic weapon fire, and you could hear people yelling. So we got up there, and Amir started hollering in Pashtun. So the guy turned around, they put a light on us, and we laid down on our bellies. And Amir kept telling them, hey, we're good guys. We're here. We know so-and-so, this and that. We started using names of the commanders and things that were on the base, they're Afghans. So the guys came over there. One guy came over and got us, and we walked over to the vehicle. And, we were squatted down the whole time. We had our heads down moving over there, and we squatted behind this Ford Ranger. And we sat there, for a few minutes, and, gunfire was still going on pretty good. It lasted probably about 40 minutes. And anyway, I had a Kalashnikov. I carried, I think I'm crazy, but I carried a NAG Soviet 1895 pistol. And it was a 7.62 by 38 millimeter. That was my sidearm. And then I had an AK-47. So I shot the AK mag up, and I was putting another one. And then Amir looks at me and grabs me by the collar, and he says, "Arm me." He didn't have a weapon. I said, "Fool, I can't arm you." I said, "Go over and grab." About 10 yards away, there was a Taliban laying there dead. And I said, "Go grab that weapon." I said, "I'll cover you. Get on, get it." And he looked at me and told me, he says, "Are you stoned?" Just like that. So I hopped up, I ran over and I grabbed this weapon, and I ran back real quick. And I said, "Here." And I gave it to him. He said, he calls me Baba. That means father. He says, "Baba, this is a piece of," and I looked at it. The buttstock was all shot up. It had some rounds through it and everything. So I grabbed it. I charged it, the handle back, and I fired a few rounds off on it, and I gave it back to him. I said, "It still works. Use it." So from that point on, he carried that weapon the rest of our time together over there. And I had 8.5 years in country. So he had that thing fixed up, buddy. Let me tell you, it was painted. It had all this cool stuff on it, the Afghan flag. And yeah, he was proud of that. I don't know what he did with it, but that was his baby from then on.
I've had a few people on the show. One of them was, it's a pseudonym, it's not his real name, but Rasul Razek. He was Mujahideen, and then I think he actually literally was one of the men that interacted with the horse soldiers when they first came over. And he came on really talking about Afghanistan after the withdrawal, the retreat, as you called it, and the impact of the Afghan people after we'd all left. But one of the things that he said, one of the things that some of the special forces guys have said as well, is early on, that you were really having an impact. And then when they started pulling troops over to Iraq, that kind of, that momentum got cleaved. So talk to me about that.
Well, what I wasn't privy to all the insides there with the ground groups. My mission was on the training process and being embedded in the Army. because I had 19 NATO weapon systems to train their army on. And that, it's both sides, and it's the police force and the Afghan National Army. So there's a lot of stuff to talk about there. But as far as them going to Iraq, I could see, and I could understand why that there was a void there for a while, because you built a friendship, a brotherhood, a trust early on with the initial people that got on the ground over there. I know a couple of them, and outstanding individuals to this day, and they're pro-Afghan crazy, man. One just spoke up in Congress recently, outstanding. But those things that we've neglected to do, and those relationships, when you bring new people on board, you have to rebuild that. And those rotations, you're looking at 6 months, and if you have to stay 8 months, it's special, getting permission like that. So, there's always a turnaround. And then, after a while, this, your people on the ground, the Afghans looking at, and then the corruption comes in. They took a beautiful thing and cultural thing that Afghans have, about when you meet somebody of a title or of importance, you always want to be, congenial, bring a small gift, something. And it just got blown out of proportion and kept growing and growing. And, we knew about this. I mean, everybody I know knew about the corruption within the Afghan army, and it had a lot to do with the equipment we had. Let me tell you, I had some fights over getting weapons parts from Afghan Corps commanders because they owned it, but I'm trying to use it to benefit their soldiers. And, we had to go around the table a few times to make them understand, and get that cooperation. But thank God I had the longevity there. So, but those other folks that had to rotate, it's difficult. And they would come back, and then, that old bond would be built again in some of those cases. The guys would come back and re-energize, or perhaps be in a whole different area. But over a period of time, they would have the experience they had on the ground, negative or positive. And a lot of it, they were sheltered from, the communities and things like that. I had the experience of, the pleasure of that. And then I said the honor, really, of being amongst the people and seeing their lifestyles and how they lived. And, those types of things, that the soldier was out there in the bush, pulling triggers and throwing hand grenades. They have a different outlook on, that type of thing. But again, you build the bonds with your interpreters and your cultural advisors, the guys you worked with, those soldiers, and, you start caring about them. They become a part of your life, really. And especially if they save your life, like my guy did, 4 separate occasions. He, I'm lucky to be here, honestly. And, it's like he told me, he says, you say that about me, is what he's saying to me. And he says, but you saved me. Look who you saved, Baba. And it's that type of emotion, I get emotional when I talk about those guys, man. It's just, it's so bad, so sad for them. A lot of them don't have that opportunity anymore. It's a constant struggle. Their lifestyle over there, man, it's an existence, really, because you got to get up, chop the wood, build the fire, chase the chicken around, or get the eggs, milk the cow, that type of lifestyle. If you're not living in the city and have money, a decent job, the effort you put into life is through your own hands and your family members, and it's a difficult lifestyle. It really is. Not everybody, even the folks we have in America that live in on a lower level than we live, are living better than Afghan families are. We have the benefits in this country and things that support them. They don't. It's by their own will and, fortitude to make it through the day or the year.
Talk to me about your perspective of the Iraq conflict. When 9/11 first happened, and then shortly after we were going to Iraq, immediately being someone who understood geography a little bit, I'm like, well, those are two very different countries, and this seems to all be being lumped into the response to 9/11. Now, fast forward to recent conversations, you're getting a lot of veterans from the Iraqi conflict that served over there that are really questioning, why were we there? Now, not in any way, shape, or form undermining the impact that they make, because obviously when they were in country, they were protecting people against bad, people, and they were, building schools and all these things that you hear about on, that aren't on the news, the kind of altruistic side. So 1,000%
Right.
made a difference. But the overall mission and some of the reasons that they were told they were going in the first place, we now know weren't entirely factual. So with that, also pulling resources from Afghanistan, what is your perspective of the Iraq conflict in general?
Well, we went over there with good intentions, and we had great support from NATO, all that going on. And just the society there is more modern to start with. It's just that environment itself was, it's just night and day, James. And the people, it was, I wrote up the highway of death, they called it, and we'd pick up principals from the office, from the airport, and bring them back, and we'd fly around to different places, for meetings, etc. But going up and down that highway every day, we'd get hellion poured on us. We had these, they were white French vehicles, with gun turret on them and all that. But man, they always replacing the windows and tires and that kind of stuff, And, so they started using aircraft, of course. We kept complaining and bitching about, I don't know about this. And then coming back with this guy, a 4-star general or a senator, and you're going to let them experience that? I don't think that's a good idea, man. So we started doing a lot more aircraft movement and that kind of thing, and being more, secure with that type of movement. But yeah, that's a whole different environment. And why we were there, was is one of the things, it was the weapons of mass destruction, going over there looking for that stuff. And, that was all a forest, and that's part of it. But look at where we are today with the country again. And, the president's involved right now. I hate to see us get back on the ground anywhere in the world, totally. I don't see, trying to support an element, for instance, like Afghanistan. I'm saying we need another Charlie Wilson. If you didn't see that movie, we need some help there. And that's going to help a lot of things in the world, because there's so much negative terroristic activities and folks over there in Afghanistan now. It's 10 times worse than it was. And it's just growing every day. The madrasas, it's insane. And Iraq as a whole, it's just, we were there for a period of time, unsuccessfully, and now we're back involved in the political concerns the people have there. And Iran's another one, that's it's going to raise its ugly head again.
Taking a massive tangent, if you were, I don't used to say king, but this is going to have to be ruling the entire planet for this answer. If you could literally kind of wave a magic wand, what will we need to do to finally learn from history that is just wrought with lessons, and start de-escalating so many of these conflicts around the world, starting with on our own soil here?
Wow. Well, first off, we've got to learn to understand and abide by laws, and what our country was built on was our rights, our Bill of Rights, our Congress and our Senate, and all the political parts of our country's operation daily. And then you get to the civilians and, the different states. We have to learn to get along a lot better than we have been doing, and to see the things on, I see those things on TV, and it's like third world country action to me, where you got people in paramilitary uniforms, and, they're carrying weapons. Unfortunately, there's been 2 uncalled for deaths, and, those types of things going on in our country right now. And we need to get a hold on it, because, it's not just that. let's go back again and talk about, the moral injury that's caused millions of veterans after 20 years of war in Afghanistan, multiplied by what we see today. I'm thinking in my own mind, is there something greater going to happen? I mean, tremendous. Is there going to be a revolution? What's going on in this country right now? It's really, something an eye-opening thing that we need to get a hold of pretty quick. I'm glad to see the action being taken there by the president and removing and placing other things in place, and hopefully they'll get a hold on it. And that's what we got to do. We got to work together closely together more and understand, each state has its own set of governments and things within its bodies, in their little civil societies in every little town and so on. So, when you go in there with a entourage of folks with an attitude about we're hunting bad guys, and then they're doing more damage to the population than they are doing to the bad guys, then, we need to rethink that process.
I just don't think it's black and white as well what constitutes a bad guy when it comes to immigration, because I think there's a nuance. You've got people that have come here, and we're going to get to it. For example, people that helped us in the conflicts we've already talked about, or maybe they just came across the border, or they were carried as an infant, didn't have much of a conversation, spent 30, 40 years now they're being shipped back to a country that they've never known, that they don't even have a house in. So to me, there needs to be a kind of grandfathering in for people that have proven themselves. And I always say this, the people that should be the most pissed off are the people like myself who paid thousands of dollars and did immigration air quotes properly. Like, we're the ones who have an issue, and I don't, do we? And no one's saying that we don't want the people that are a detriment to our country to be removed. And absolutely, those are the ones that should be hunted down, just the way you hunt down a burglar or a rapist or a murderer or anything. But people that are just undocumented, if you grandfather them in, well, now they're paying taxes. Now that's a win-win. But hunting them down and snatching them from their children and creating this, horrendous tension that you're talking about, nothing good is going to come from that. We can already see it.
Absolutely. I agree with you, James. You're right. And, the tragic deaths, that's just uncalled for, those actions really, and to see it in our society today. But again, look out, I just go back to the retreat again of Kabul. And since then, and look at how everything has just gone to hell, literally, in the world. And it's in our country now more so than it has been.
One of my guests made a really astute observation, and I talk about it all the time. He said, America is supposed to be the poster child of democracy. He said, so if you're looking at that poster, what are you thinking about that philosophical, idea? And I agree with him 100%. If we beat our chests and just say we're the greatest country in the world, but don't put any work into it, then fast forward 20, 30 years, now you've got a population that's 75% overweight or obese. Our school children are rehearsing their murders in their school. 100,000 Americans die from opioids every year. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. We're not the best. So we have to stop saying that, have the humility. But we have an opportunity to be such an incredibly powerful influence in a good way. If we really invested in our country and made it phenomenal and took care of the things that are not working, and asked Finland and Norway and Japan and Portugal and all these other countries that are doing those areas really well. Now people look at America and go, wow, they've got their shit together in that country. Maybe this democracy thing is worth a try. But right now, when we're seeing what's on our news, do you think anyone's going to be trying democracy, or is it going to be viewed the same way as we view communism in North Korea?
Yeah, it's pretty much, I got to agree with you. And that was an astute observation. And that has a lot to do with what we live, the way, our lives, what's involved, what we see, what we interact with, and again, going back to, our relationships with allies overseas in different places. And then like yourself, getting here legally. And then, I agree, hunting down the illegals and the bad folks, I'm all about that. But doing it in the manner we have been doing is not the right way to do it. When you start inflicting terror and making people hide, not go to the store and not going to school, it's time to rethink what we need to do with operations within our own country, so we don't look, we already look bad to the world, in my opinion. I mean, it's sad to say, but we've got a lot of work to do to gain back that trust and, the willingness of folks coming here is just, it's like there's not very many countries that are going to accept refugees at this point. There's just a handful. So, the queue line's pretty long. And if you have a case, for instance, that's, you're requesting expedited because of extreme danger or their ages of the people or something of this nature, you could probably get in a little quicker, but it's going to take some time and a lot of effort. But those actions that we see today in America, it's like, I'm going to say America's afraid to have Afghans, come back into our country, because we had a couple of bad seeds. So it's like anything else, when one bad person does, from Afghanistan, they're here and, like that guy drove across country, and that just gives a bad name to everybody, and that's what people that don't understand, the commitment we have and the veterans that were involved in 20 years of war. I mean, come on, you got to have a relationship somewhere, man, whether it's good or bad, but hopefully it's positive. And we can see a lot of that in the communities we live in. There's people out there that have gone above and beyond to get their allies here to America, to Canada, Europe, different places. But, it's not been an easy task for anyone due to the, the negative view the world has on, I think, America as a whole. I mean, look at our immigration policy now. Ain't nobody getting in here. Not unless you're a Venezuelan, you got a sack full of money or something like that.
Or a white South African. For some reason, that's
fine. Oh, yeah. Oh, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It is crazy, though, because if you think about it, it would be like saying you're going to get rid of all black people in America because of the DC shooter.
Yeah, it's insane.
It's a mental health crisis is what we have. It happens to be Afghan. I mean, there was an Australian that killed all those poor people in the mosque in New Zealand. Now you're going to stop all Aussies from going to New Zealand. You know what I mean? It's we got to identify it as these are sick people who committed sick acts. It's not about the religion or the race or the nationality. It's a broken mind by that point. Because, I mean, I think one thing that we really forget is if you had an Afghan and a French and a Nepalese and a British, a group of toddlers, and you put a ball amongst them, what are they going to do? They're going to kick the ball around and run and laugh and fall over and pick flowers and pet the dog. They're not going to think, well, hold on a second, you're a Muslim, I can't play a ball. You know what I mean? We all start off as human beings, and then we get labeled and segregated, and then under, cowardly, leadership, I'm using air quotes, you'll get divided and set upon each other. And this is where we are now.
Yep, I agree. And it's sad, but it's, we see, it's more prevalent because we have, the media in our face a lot more in these times than in the past times, but we see it a lot more. But, on a big scale, I honestly still have faith in humanity, James. There's more of us out there. And, there are a lot of them are united through these NGOs. But in my case, and I'm not whining, it's really been extra challenging being by myself and working through these processes to have folks come here legally, and it's quite time consuming and a lot of research and making sure that the documents are correct and there won't be any questions and that type of thing. It's a lot of effort, but I got to say one of those cases that puzzled me about the guy driving across the country and shooting folks is, I don't understand, he got here, but I don't think his support group had set him up correctly because from what I understand, he didn't have a work permit. He couldn't work. The guy's got a family, and there were state benefits and things going on that were kept being taken away. And it just got to a point that, he was trying to make a statement, and unfortunately, he didn't get any mental help, and that's what he needed. So I figured, he didn't have a support group there, veterans, somebody to take care of an American or an Afghan. And those kinds of things get away from us, and to blame the process of vetting and the things that, the government set up to get to that process and to complete it, it takes years, really, it takes years. And the example I'm going to give is Amir's example with, it took over 3 years, 3 years. And that was he and his wife. He's got 6 daughters and 2 sons and a new addition back in June. So we got an American citizen in the family now, but that's 9 children, he and his wife. And when they got here, every one of them has a green card. It says they're legal permanent residents until 2035. So, that's the way you go. So, and they carry the documents everywhere they go. He's got 2 jobs. He's really making an effort to do it. He just bought his car, got a driver's license. He drove up to Louisville this morning in the snow to get his tag for his car. The kids are all doing good in school. I'm very thankful and blessed. The process was a mother bear getting through it. But I don't care what anybody else says, that vetting process is strong. And if you go through it correctly without trying to bypass anything, you're going to be all right. As long as you got a good support group and you got people that really care about you. You're not just another group of family members of hundreds you've helped, because you don't have any relationship there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's important.
I want to get to the retreat and then move forward from that as far as trying to get people out. But just before we do, you'd mentioned that Amir had saved your life 4 times. What's one of the examples of that? Again, just so people can see, how much courage and how much selflessness there was from many of these people that you then ultimately brought to the U.S.
All right. I'll talk about the last one. There was one at an airport in Herat. There was a riot there. But anyway, the last one was in Gardez, Afghanistan. All I'm going to say is lots of cobras in Gardez, man. But anyway, we get there, it's a real small Afghan outpost thing. So we get there and, start doing the things I do, and getting about nighttime, and we start getting a lot of, contact all around us. And we're kind of down in the low ground too, so that's not encouraging. It's like being in a bucket kind of thing. Anyway, so it just kept getting worse and worse. And anyway, Sam and I are trying to maneuver out of the kill zone. We were in front of the fire, the friendly fire. So we're moving out of the way. And anyway, Sam had his piece, and he's firing, he's not really aiming it at anybody. He's just holding it up and firing it over his back, over his shoulder like. And then I take a round in my back. And from that point on, I'm at first I just thought he hit me, like with the butt of the rifle or something, or pushed me down. And then I realized, hey man, I started feeling all this. It's like somebody pouring warm water on you. That's your blood. And from that point on, it just a lot more chaos. I got to a medic, an Afghan, and putting the it was that stuff in a tube. I forget what it's called, but anyway,
The quick clot stuff.
Yeah, that quick clot, and then a bandage and everything, and then under fire, they had medevacs coming in for others, and I got to get on one of those medevacs. But Sam drugged me under fire and put me on a medevac, a Black Hawk helicopter, and they flew me to the triage there in Bagram Air Base, and I was there for I don't know, 3 or 4 days, and I met up with a Ranger captain named Dan Kruger. He's a lieutenant colonel now, battalion commander at Fort Bragg at the 505. Anyway, Ranger Kruger and I were together there, and we ended up being roommates in Landstuhl, Germany, on the dignitary ward, of the hospital, because they didn't know what to do with me. I had a beard and all that other mess, Anyway, so I met him there, and then went through that process. And that's 8 months later. I went back to Afghanistan, but I still wore civilian clothes, Afghan clothes and stuff, but I didn't have to do as much traveling. I worked more with the Ministry of Defense there in Kabul. There, working with CJ5 and those guys in Kabul at Eggers.
So talk to me about the rumblings of there being a withdrawal, and then through your eyes, the movement that you saw trying to get these allied Afghans out to safety, knowing what would happen to them if they stayed.
Oh, well, we could see that coming a long way down the line, when they started downsizing and, the training, like, let's say you have rollover training, they met the MRAPs and that kind of stuff. All those types of things are going away. The contracts were, the contracts that were there, like for, the different little UAV stuff they had going on, putting them together and that kind of thing. All that stuff going away, people talking about, taking this away and that away. So we had a pretty good idea, but we had no idea that we were going to leave the country the way we did. It just unbelievable, man. I just can't get why we did what we did the way we did it. It's crazy. And it did cause a lot of suffering because of that, deep suffering in life. You could see, everybody had a good idea, but there hadn't really there's been a lot of, coffee pot talk, if you will, and that, but nothing really, substantial about we're leaving on this date. We heard what the president said, and all that prior to it going down, and you just have to wait, and to see it the way it is, all those places we had, like Bagram and the Kandahar and all those places to be rolled out and just given up, and the equipment left behind, just mind-boggling. That's, to me, is, you'd never want to do that. And I mean, we had a little bit of that in Vietnam time frame, but not near as atrocious as what we left on the ground to get reused, for the wrong reasons. But yeah, we could see that, and then they tried a lot of different programs over there. One was like, the Taliban's paying a fighter like $8 a day, so the army or the government, with our coercion, come up with a program through an NGO or somebody to pay them $12 a day to dig a ditch in the city to make it cleaner, or do some water work, or be a bug sprayer or something like that. So there was those efforts being made, that I saw, that these guys were, they could be easily, when you got somebody going in your home and you kick open the door and you go through your mom's room and you throw around her clothes and you humiliate the father in front of the family and that kind of thing. And once they leave, that young kid, that 18-year-old kid's got an attitude. He wants some vengeance, he wants some payback. So, he goes and he might get up with some of those guys for a little bit and, get his satisfaction that way. But when you're talking about money at $12 an hour, that's some serious money for an Afghan during that time frame. I mean, you get a lot done with $12 an hour, So, those types of things where you saw, the true humanitarian efforts and things and the NGOs over there, they had a lot to do with those humanitarian efforts, really. Because, we had the war focus, people like me, doing our thing, trying to train up an army, and then the other guys fighting and training up the, the Mujahideen or whoever, those folks out in the villages. And, it's just so diverse and such a challenge to operate in that country to start with. It's just unbelievably remote. I mean, the roads and just traveling, like going from Kabul to Jalalabad, that'll take you about 3 hours on a bus, and then you got checkpoints along the way. Somebody's going to check you out, especially nowadays. And, amongst that, I tell you, there's a lot of highway robbery, highwaymen. This stuff's going on, man. You don't hear about it, but it's definitely a part of it. And, those guys over there with that Taliban mentality or that title, they're nothing more than hoodlums and crooks and drug abusers, really. And, the Mad Hatter that's running the show, it's insane. It's just a matter of time. And, they got a lot of problems internally with their the Taliban leadership. And, it's just a matter of time. I'd love to see the male population grow a set of nuts and take the country back. And, that kind of thing. But, when you got starvation and fear, those two things there are primary detractors when you're trying to oppress a society, and especially the hunger part of it. And believe me, there's people dying of hunger every day over there. It's a damn shame.
That's what Rasul was saying after we had withdrawn, was now you had starvation, now you had food being cut off, then you had, I think it was the winter following that, so you had people freezing to death as well. So, we kind of washed our hand as a nation, not taking into account the damage that was left and how the people there were going to suffer, not just from the hands of the oppression itself, but just the lack of infrastructure and the lack of food, and kind of the same thing with areas of Gaza.
Exactly. Yeah, it is. Now, it is, Gaza's obliterated. I mean, really, you just look at that place. It's a big dump right now. You can't live there. I mean, really. There's people living there in existence there today in that rubble, trying to survive. And the same thing with Kabul. I mean, you could go there today and you can see buildings that are just, you don't know how they're still standing. And there's no glass in the windows. There's, a curtain or a sheet of some sort, and lucky if you got a door. But there's families like that, and it's just unfortunate. And it could have been a lot better if we would have done the right thing and left the country in some fashion of leadership instead of just abandoning everyone. And again, I blame their leadership as well. They all hauled ass, as fast as they could, and left the country to the beast. And that's where it is today. Damn shame.
So what should have happened? Because what has happened, but I think the real tragedy is when you don't reflect then and go, okay, well, let's pull the lessons from it. Same as COVID. I talk about COVID all the time because there were so many things that were done wrong, but that's come and gone now. But what we need to do is like, all right, well then what was done wrong? How can we not do that again? What was done right? Okay, we'll repeat that next time. And it's the same with this. So from the withdrawal itself, and then, equally as importantly, making sure that anyone that assisted the Allied forces were, brought out of the country if they needed to be. What should have happened versus what did happen?
Well, just my opinion. We should have had, part of it, the big part of it was the corruption within the army and the government of Afghanistan. And us not getting a hold of that right sooner. And everybody knew about it. So that's a part of it. And then, you had, it should have been set up to where there was some type of government there with an oversee. We could oversee it without having to be in direct conflict with the Taliban. We just allowed it to happen. Come on. We're fully capable of keeping that at bay. We just allowed it to happen. Piece by piece, okay, Bagram, okay, Kandahar, those little, just walked away from it, left nobody, and what are you going to do when your cohorts, your people that you're working with, that army sees what's going on? They know there's no help for them, and their ass is grass pretty much, because the new regime obviously is going to take retribution, whether it be death, punishment, prison, whatever. But you're not getting away with what went on within the country during the war if you're on the opposing side. And, that's the way it went. And we should not have allowed it to go down the way it went. That's just my opinion. We could have done a better job, obviously. And I mean, from our level, the president's level, putting a cap on when we should go, and then how it was the operation was done. And then the downsizing part of that as well was effective because we didn't have enough really, those fighting forces and that we had back in the day. If we had that instead of downsizing, the plan was in place. I'm sure it probably a year or two, if not, that long before, we implemented it. And then it came on as a rush. I mean, look at all the guys that were there during the Abbey Gate. I mean, they pulled out from here and there in different places. They really didn't know what the hell was going on. I mean, they were pretty much reacting to that environment and then, realizing, oh shit, we're leaving, and my experience there that day, I'm on the phone. I'm not there personally. I'm on the phone with Amir, and the bomb goes off. And then the phone goes off and, hits the ground, all the noise. And then a few minutes later, I get a call back, and it's him. And he's telling me, he's showing me his face is cut up. He got his face cut. He broke his nose. Anyway, he's saying, I'm going to Jalalabad. I said, good, get your ass to Jalalabad quick. And, he told me the bomb went off, this and that. So he's on the way to Jalalabad. He meets a cousin of his on the way and says, hey, cuz, the Taliban's at your house and they beat your father and broke his femur bone in the street and then terrorized the children and the wife. So he's on his way home. I says, hey, man, you can't go home, So I hid him around the country for about 90 days in mosques and different places, people I know, good people. And, he finally got to go back home. But, from that point on, it's just scared to death. And I had him, he's a smart man. When I got him, he's a young man. He's 20 years old when I got him. And he's 36 now. So I've had a long relationship with this guy. And, part of the deal when I told him, I says, he wants to continue to work for the government, our government. He'd already knocked out the requirement to get an SIV. I tried to get him to go back in the day, but his mom has tuberculosis, so he didn't want to leave. So anyway, finally get to the point to where, it's getting the SIV time and, it's all part of trying to put together the things, as for him to get here. But that took so long in his life and family jeopardy there in Jalalabad. It's still going on today. That's why I don't say his real name. I don't show his face, and unless it's a friend like you are. I trust you. I know you're not going to blast things out there like that, James. But there's things you got to protect them still to this day. His family over there. So you got to consider those things as well. And I mean, it's sad the way it turned out, but we could have done a lot better, man, by planning better and the execution about leaving. And I know the majority of us feel bad about that. I mean, really, it's a moral injury, the way we've done those people after 20 years, and the friendships made and the lives lost. It's a darn shame.
I think, like we were talking at the beginning of the conversation about the compounding layers, you have organizational betrayal. So whether you are under, at that point, the Biden administration and the withdrawal, or whether it's currently and you served alongside all these allied soldiers and now your commander in chief is talking about them. They weren't near the front line and didn't do anything. You've got these people that you fought alongside and now they're not getting visas anymore. I mean, that's another there's multiple moral injuries that are compounding. And then we wonder why we have this veteran mental health crisis.
Exactly. That's where I'm at. I'm telling you, it's hard for me to grasp every day. I mean, really, it's been a nightmare for everyone that I've involved with. I'm talking Afghans, and to see our government, to do the things they've done, it's killing me. I mean, really, I'm thankful, they're here and that process worked. but to shut it off, and to not allow it to continue to go forth and free people that need it, to give them a future so their kids can have an education. And, sixth grade is it for girls. Once you get to the sixth grade, no more education for you unless you do it on the down low, with a hidden opportunity, which are out there, thank God. But the majority of them don't have that opportunity, to continue their education. That's just an example, so they end up early child marriages, that kind of thing, selling their kids because they can't afford to feed the other 10, It's just, and then people are going to say, well, why do they have so many children? It's just, that shouldn't matter. They were taking care of them. They obviously look healthy, but at this point, they're not allowed to have the sustenance that's necessary, to continue that support for families. And it's unbelievably sad over there. One of the worst, or the worst, border crossing in the world is Torkham Bridge up there on the Pakistan border of Afghanistan. And you're talking about a horror scene. Man, it's incredibly, it's awful. It's just trash and people and suffering, especially now in the wintertime.
And that's just people trying to get into another country and away from Afghanistan?
Or they're being deported from Pakistan, the majority of them, and then, the ones that are just homeless or whatever, for whatever reason. But the majority of those people, they come back. Now, here's the situation. If you're a female and you have a male escort, you're good to go. But if you don't, and you come back to Afghanistan from Pakistan, they're like, the Taliban's like, you've been gone 4 years. Where's your man? What have you been doing for 4 years? All this type of questioning and, that kind of thing. And then ultimately, bad things are going to happen to you if you're a female and you don't have a family. And, I'm telling you, man, I'm going through an experience right now that is very tragic, involving they're young adults now, but they were children when I first got them. And it's still ongoing. They're suffering, and it's just ridiculous. And, the programs, again, aren't there anymore to support us. And it's sad to see. And it's just because of, really, I think it has to do with a lot of prejudicial attitudes within the administration, and the falsehoods that were spoken and believed by people with authority about how negative or unsat the vetting processes are, and things of this nature, that's impeding the credibility of our Afghan allies and others. Iraq, we're still fooling around with Iraqis from way back when. And we didn't do that right either. There's been enough getting out, but still there's plenty there that have earned the right, or at least qualifies to come to America or another country. Getting the asylum and that type of thing nowadays is difficult to do. You've got to have a pretty tight case, of life and death type stuff. And I do. And I've got a case like that right now.
So what needs to change? I would argue Control-Alt-Delete on the way that we choose leaders would be a good start, but that's my personal opinion. If you can buy yourself a president, if you're a drug company or a weapons manufacturer, that's probably not what our forefathers were thinking of initially. But aside from that, like to make sure that we do honor these people who literally risk their lives, and in the lone survivor story, for example, protected an American naval man, at the risk, and even the death of some of their people. This kind of human that we then bring them to safety, or either put them in safety in their own country, like you said, if that's possible, or bring them to a different country. what do we need to change to make sure that those people through that vetting system do have a pipeline to safety after risking their lives for us?
Well, first off, we've got to get Congress and the Senate to reopen those programs. I mean, there's one, it's a great organization out there called Afghan Evac. I know you've heard of it, and they do a lot of good work, but it's folks like that are out there, interacting with Congress and the senators and the people on the ground that make these laws and can make a difference and changes. But they're there already. The laws are there. The people are there, and to do the work. It's just, they've let people go. They shut the programs down, and I can talk about it because there's one specific program that my current case was in that got smashed, and they were getting ready to be referred to get vetted out with the IRAP, and then they would have came here to Kentucky, but it didn't happen because they crushed the program. The first executive order slammed that, and then it didn't leave a lot of opportunities. If you didn't have an SIV case, and this is the case I'm speaking of, these individuals, these young adults now were children when I got them in 2021. Now they're young adults. They're just barely teenagers right now. No supervision, no parents, only Dewey. So that process, I had to move to another avenue, which was humanitarian parole. So once I opened that up, spent thousands of dollars with an attorney, a quality attorney at that, 300 documents, 9 PDFs submitted. We got a case number within 24 hours from the State Department, or the the folks we sent. Anyway, we got a case number, and we're looking good. So it's like 3 weeks into that, and then boom, the second executive order stopped that, and that's the only hope they've had. These 3 individuals, these siblings, have had to get their freedom, to come to the States. Now, all that's blocked. There's nobody coming to America like we spoke of earlier, unless you're white South African or you got a pocket full of money. And, which you can open up a $1 billion business in America and make Trump happy. But, so with that said, there hasn't been a lot of other avenues to help allies. Now, these are ally children. Mother and father are dead. And, the only way they had to get here was SIV. So dad's dead. So I got all his LORs that proved that he worked for 10 years for the United States government. He's dead. Mom's dead. There's no living relatives that would have anything, to do with these children. And anyway, so that it's been difficult. So the only other way that I could possibly try to get them on this side of the earth was through the Canadian process. And fortunately, I've been blessed with some strong contacts that have worked in Afghanistan as an NGO for over 20 years. Awesome people. Anyway, I've connected through them, through an Afghan gentleman that has a really good immigration attorney in Canada. So this weekend, at some point, I'm going to have a Zoom call with this lawyer, myself, and these other 2 friends of mine about getting these siblings into Canada from Pakistan. But that's really been what a nightmare that's been for them, man. So tragic, unbelievable, sad. What they suffered for no real reason of their own, it's just because they were family members. I can tell you, it's been awful. It's been awful. Left behind, I had them hooked up with a quality individual over there, and they got left behind. I had to move them around the country 4 months, from Mazar Sharif to Kandahar, back to Kabul, to safe houses. And I say a safe house. Tragic, tragic, tragic place. Packed with Afghans, families, a couple of dead children. It's just, things like that. It's wintertime, and we get left behind. And unfortunately, another Afghan turned them into the Taliban, and they were captive for 62 days. Oh my God. It took a lot of effort, and I'm going to say there's one individual on this earth that made it happen, and I'd like to use his name, but I don't want him to get mad at me. But he's a retired lieutenant colonel, Special Forces, and he personally negotiated their release from the Taliban. And that day we got them into Pakistan with medical visas, and that's where they've been ever since. And but that whole ordeal was unbelievably stressing, and I stayed up for like over 2 days, moving them around, and the phone conversations and the NGOs, those lying bastards. I had so many people. Oh, we get a manifest. We'll go to Kandahar. You get down there, there's no planes. I mean, like, what the dude you're dealing with's gone. Anyway. It was a nightmare. There's all types of that stuff going on. Bribes, and I've got a bone to pick with a former. This guy's still living. He's in Florida too, but he hosed. He was responsible pretty much for the kids getting turned into the Taliban. But anyway, that's a whole nother subject. But anyway, the processes are there. They just need to reenact them, and it's not going to take a lot of effort. All they got to do is say vote on it and reopen them, because there's enough out there. And the SIVs are going to happen, but if you got a circumstance or a situation like mine, it's complicated because you've got 3 siblings, 2 girls and a brother. They don't have any family. I started this out in 2021. Everybody and their brother on earth that had the power and authority to hook me up, to try to help, but they didn't trust me. They thought I was human trafficking. So I had to go down that route and disprove all that. And that was a process. I had to get a third party to look into this and verify who I was and what I was dealing with, and so on and so forth. So it got to be a real nightmare, about, every time I would talk about it or try to do something for these siblings, these children, and they're near and dear to my heart, honestly. They're so precious to me. And it's sad that they're living in the conditions they are. It's the best I can do right now. But they're safe, they're fed, and they have a warm place to stay. And, that's the best I can do. I'm only one Joe, man. So anyway, it's hopefully going to work out, but the circumstance surrounding it is just the tragedy and the things that they endured. They're trying to leave the country and, being qualified for an SIVs. And now, without the father and without that, they don't have any hope. Even if there was, you'd have to start all over again. It'd be like 3 years, or whatever. So I'd like to get some more attention to them, to get some assistance. I'm pretty confident that my connections are going to at least come up with an opportunity that we can get them into Canada, because I know Canada's still accepting Afghans and asylees and refugees, and they're definitely a refugee, and they're in danger. I tell you, though, when we first got there, gone through the medical visa process, they were in a safe house. They couldn't stay there any longer because they were moving the safe house down to another southern area from Islamabad. So I got my kids together, and we rented a good place with a gentleman that I know from service before, but he has a home there, and he's been really good. He's got 4 daughters, a wife, and 1 young baby son. But he helps protect the kids and watches out for them, and and then I got the rent money coming to him every month. But he's really been an asset there. I'm blessed. But for the life that they're living there, they haven't had really any education to speak of. I had them going to school, and but with all the activity about, there's no more visa renewals, so they're in country illegally. 2 years ago, on my birthday, they were arrested and put on the deportation list. So through a DEA friend of mine stateside, I got in contact with some guys over there, and they went and we got them out of there, got them released, and they're back into my care and where I have them now. And it's the time, they're it's just running out. I mean, they're young adults now, and to be young females in Pakistan or Afghanistan, it's not a good thing. There are wolves over there, if you know what I'm talking about. They prey upon young women and children, nasty people. And, that's another thing, And I went from medical visas to tourist visas, which was expensive, but it was every 6 months. But the kicker to that is every 3 months, you got to move them back to the worst border crossing in the world to get exit and entry stamps again. So I did that twice, and I said, to hell with that. Because it's risky. It's risky as hell. And, because you go up there every time, the girls got to take their hijab down. They got to put their hair behind their ears. They got to get photoed, DNA checked. And that's every time. And I mean, after a while, now right now, they're illegal in the country, man. I'm worried like sick to my stomach. It's just a matter of time. If somebody gets them or finds out, they're gone. And I'll never know what happened to them. I take my old ass over there and start groundhogging, trying to find out, but that's a possibility.
Well, this goes back to, what we were talking about earlier. If we can really invest in our own country and let's be honest, re-find the wisdom of most of the holy books, which is kindness, compassion, community service, and also look at the impact that we've had on other areas of the world and try and make a positive impact. So a perfect example is drug prohibition in the States, making it illegal to be an addict. And I'm not talking about selling, I'm not talking about smuggling, and I'm not talking about crimes done by addicts that are crimes, burglary and, all the other things. Mm-hmm. But if you put that into the hands of the medical community, imagine the impact that would have on the illicit drug trade, on, the smuggling. If there's no consumer in the US anymore, because either you've got yourself clean through all the resources that have been put in, like the Portuguese model, or if you are an addict, you're in safe injection sites and you're under medical supervision, so you're not dying in the streets of San Francisco. Now, all of a sudden, there's no need for the illicit drug trade anymore. So you've cut the head off the snake. And that, I think, is how you then help other countries. And one of the things that I always use as an example is Haiti is on my doorstep. And that place is an absolute disaster. Imagine the good that we could do if we helped, whatever that looks like. A Haitian that was then educated in the US and became a real leader and then went back to their home country and stabilized them. The tourism potential of Haiti through the cruise ships and, and just vacations, that alone could sustain that island, because the other half is the Dominican Republic, and it does. So, this is what maddens me, is if we can stop destroying ourselves and put everything back where we're doing well, then we can be not Team America World Police, but Team America World, EMS, however you want to, describe it. So now that you're not only creating destruction and conflicts in other countries, but now, you accept the immigrants that, really, really need to get away, but ultimately you stabilize their country. Because as Rasul made a comment, the problem is when we have all these people fleeing Afghanistan, sometimes that's their greatest minds that are fleeing, the doctors and the leaders. And, So you don't want everyone to be fleeing to your country anyway. You want to help them get back on their feet in their own country, ultimately.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's true. Well, I didn't get to finish up about Amir.
No, please carry on.
But no, I was just going to say about, a few sentences ago, I was talking about, what he had gone through and everything, but I helped him get through dental school, and he graduated with 5 years of dental school prior to coming over here. But he's working 2 jobs. He's not a dentist. Of course, he's got to go through that process again, but as an educated man. And there's lots of people like that still over there, but you don't hear about them. They're incognito or hiding. Now, I do have a friend there he's actually a friend of Amir's. They went to school together. He runs a little shop over there, a little pulling Taliban teeth and whatever. But, they stay in touch. So I keep up with, what's going on, at least in Jalalabad, and I get the truth, so they know me. So, it's sad that, they got to slip around like that, and the education's only, and there's still good people over there, but the majority, yes, they have left, the ones that could make a difference in the country. But, dealing with an ignorant person, running a country that really, they don't have really any education to speak of. The ones that don't use it. They use it for hate and, the ideology. But, you're right. A lot of them have left the country, and for good reasons. Who would want to stay, in that environment, especially if you have daughters in the household,
Absolutely.
That's it.
Well, I'm sure there's people out there that would love to learn more about you or connect. Where are the best places online to do that, or even see if they can help in some way?
Oh, well, I'll put my email out there, and I'll give you my phone number. So you can reach me at lowercase DC Yopp JR at msn.com. I have a 24/7 phone line. It's 270-319-2045. And I'm on WhatsApp and Signal, and both those numbers are good for that. So if you're on there and you want to reach out or send me a message or something, if you can help me out in any way possible, contacts, funds, whatever, it's greatly appreciated. And then, we can build a relationship from that point on. And once you get in my circle, which is not very big, it's a good thing to be there. It's a good thing to be there, because I know enough people that, I've got a couple of 3-star generals and others that are still involved out there that, if I can help someone else, I'm all about it. I'm all about it. And, but if you're listening, not only with your ears today, but with your heart, those children, those young adults I'm speaking of, really could use the humanity and the mercy that they deserve. Really, it's sad that I wish I could do more for them. I'm limited at what I do every month. It's $500 every month, so out of my retirement. So and I got my own thing going on here, but I thank God I'm able to sustain that. But it's getting to be difficult, big difficulty. But just like a lot of people you hear about say, hey, what you've done to sustain that. I sold a Cadillac, 6 rifles, 3 pistols, those kinds of things we do, because it's important. One of those things, they're material things, sitting on the wall or in a gun case, and you look at that and you say, I could feed Amir's family for a whole month with that one gun. You know what I mean? And those things like that, you have to let go. And it's for a worthy cause. I don't regret it at all. But You know, there'll be a time where, when people with, their post-traumatic stress disorders and the things that have affected them through their service time, whether it be in the military or EMTs or firefighters, they all experience a level of trauma and the humanitarian part of it, dealing with human beings and having that feeling for them in that moment, because a lot of times we don't really think until afterwards, like putting yourself in their position, or the comfort level they have. What would you like to be done? Those types of things, the consideration there, and it's just, there's so many organizations out there with people, hundreds of people and lots of money. But when you're a lone ranger and you're dealing with human life, and it's getting to be very difficult to sustain them, you got to reach out sometime, because you're dumb if you don't. I'm a strong man. I just, I don't think it's weak if you got to say, hey, I need help, whether it's through mental help or help with sustainment of, Afghan families or anyone else in the world for that matters. And just having that heart and the humanity for it, because, I've seen a lot of tragedy in my life and a lot of things that, you don't see children go home, and you hold hands and watch people pass on and give up their life. And, the things you see, the aftermath of all that, it just stays with you. You can't forget it, and it's just, it's motivated me to do right, to make a difference in the world, and to honor the promise. Just because a promise is hard to keep doesn't mean you can't keep the promise. You just have to keep going. You just never give up. You keep going no matter what. And eventually, honestly, through my experience, you will have success.
Absolutely.
And I mean, I'm thankful for the small group of folks I do have, is, that support my mental health, my family here that supports me. They see what, war has done to their father and their husband, and they've been real understanding with me, and through my treatment process and everything. I tell you, James, I don't take anything anymore. But I tell you what, when you start out taking 600 megagrams of Seroquel, come on, you can't sleep for 3 or 4 days, and that's the kind of thing a lot of people go through their trauma. And sleep is a must. You've got to have it to maintain your mental health, and to feel good about, carrying on and so forth, and having the will to do it and not give in to the pity party and to be like the other guy. And, sadly, those folks don't have the right people in their life, man. It breaks my heart every time I hear a veteran takes their life. I was one of those guys. I almost killed myself. I mean, within a second. And I ended up in treatment and for a period of time, and then continued that process until I got to the point where I said, hey, you know what? I think I found myself. I found Dewey again, and I'll be okay now.
What worked for you? We hear, a lot of VA stories about, a lot of pills being thrown at them, counseling sessions that they have to wait 6 months to get an appointment. And obviously this is not every single VA, but it seems to be a reoccurring theme. What were some of the tools that worked for you that got you away from that?
To be honest, none of the medications just kept me the way I was. It kept me dumbed down, in an unrealistic mindset. It really, over years of that abuse, really taking triazidone and all that other crap, Xanax, this and that. What worked for me was a friend of mine that was very concerned about me, and got a hold of an organization up in Maine, and it's a veterans hunting organization. Well, those guys invited me on a turkey hunt. They paid for the flight there and back, fed me the whole time I was there, treated me like I was a royalty. I had it was a gentleman's hunt, I killed 2 turkeys with 1 shot. And then a few months later, they said, hey, we're going to have a bear hunt. How would you like to go on a bear hunt? I was like, damn, yeah, man. And I was on the way to Virginia to go to a farm to stay by myself for ever how long it was going to be. And I got that phone call from that friend that said, hey, we booked you for a bear hunt in Maine. And I mean, it's Pasquale, Maine. It's all the way up to Canada, to the tip. So, Bangor, up past that. So anyway, I went on those. And getting back into the wildlife and being around those people, oh, the emotions flowed, bro. I mean, it just the way they were so concerned and helpful, and they cared about me. They showed me, just different things. And then just being in that environment, going hunting and being around those guys and being able to feel comfortable about talking about, my anger and, the things that, has caused me want to take my life or, to become, the other way, try to kill somebody, and I mean, those kinds of things. I tell you, man, I wasn't an easy person there in the beginning. I had a lot of trouble had some trouble with the police, and I went to Sam's Club. I hadn't been in Sam's Club. I don't know. It's probably been a couple of years now. But anyway, I went in there on a holiday when I first got back with my wife. It was like Thanksgiving, and anyway, she bought a case of mushroom soup. It happened to be the last case. Well, we got a big family. There's like 22 of us, grandkids, all that stuff. So we're in line. These two big boys behind me looked like they came out of Lake City hunting club there, and overalls on and stuff. And they reached over into the back. I'm up front trying to unload stuff, put it on the conveyor belt. And this big old boy reaches over and he grabs 2 hands full of soup and puts them in his cart. And I poked my head at my wife, turned around. She eased up there by me because she's only like 4 feet tall. And these guys are towering over. And I'm like, and I smiled at them, said, hey, you guys, what's up, man? Joking around. They said, hey, man, you bought all the soup. Yeah, I said, big deal. So what? I said, well, that ain't right. And I said, look, man, put that soup back in there and you're not getting any. And he said, shut up, old man. And they kept on. So I grabbed 2 cans of soup. I jumped up on the conveyor belt. I jumped off of it on top of those 2 SOBs, and I commenced to beating their ass with them soup cans. Well, I ended up in jail for 2 months, and I had to go to court, and I did 6 months of anger management. Was it worth it? Hell yes. Oh, boy. So anyway, I've come a long ways, but honestly, I got away from the meds. I'm in touch with some really, some quality folks that I stay, text with and talk to on the phone. And, I listen to them. They listen to me. We trust each other. There's no secrets. And it's that type of, that bond you need to help and to get off of that crap. If you don't need it, don't succumb to, oh, the doctor said I needed it. That's a bunch of horse, man. I mean, there's half that stuff you don't need. They're just trying to figure out to get you to a happy place or to keep you from not really being who you really are, your emotions and everything else. I mean, one of the biggest issues I have, and I'm not ashamed to say it, if it's strong enough, emotionally, I can cry at the drop of a hat nowadays, and I've never been that way. I mean, it just, all this stuff has gotten to the point to where emotionally it's just pitiful, to see the suffering on the scale it is and to see it go on for so long. It's unrealistic, man, really. In this world and day and age, the capabilities we have and the people and the minds we have, and a lot of it, again, like I said early on, I'm involved with Task Force Argo. I knew some prominent people that could have done a world of good, that had connections with the government, Congress, senators, but they turned a blind eye to me because they thought I was human trafficking. And to this day, I hope they realize, well, at one point I got kicked off of Task Force Argo because I was an angry man. But anyway, they helped me out a lot, just information-wise and meeting people. But organizations like that, they have their limits, and they, if it gets complicated, like my case is complicated, you got to have that right individual and the right mindset to make it happen. And then you got to have somebody that's going to be willing to work with you, like I have now. And, they're awesome people, man. Jan and John Bradley. Afghan Lima found that, and it's Lima Afghan Foundation. And John is a retired 3-star general. His lovely wife, Jan, they've been married 50 some years, I've been married almost that long, 48 for me. But anyhow, they're involved. They're helping me with these young adults. And there's people out there like that, that are still willing to go forth and cross the line and, put their name out there and stand by you and, try to accomplish difficult tasks like this is. This is something it's going to take people to really get behind to make it happen. And I'm telling you, this is the last shot we have to get on this side of the world for those young adults. And I hope to God it happens. It's just getting to where I just can't fathom, man. If something happens to them kids, I blame myself. It's just not, I don't know of another word, but it hasn't been fair to us. And, like the Welcome Corps program, James, I had to go through a process where online you have to take a class and get certified to be the group leader. And then you have to find 5 people that live within 50 miles of you. And you have to get them all vetted out with police reports and all that. It's like $15 a person. I did all that. I paid for their things. I got not my sister. I got my oldest daughter, myself, retired Army chaplain, his wife and daughter. And that was my nucleus for the Welcome Corps program. And then you go through all these other levels of vetting and processing, during that, making sure everybody's name's right and they're related and all those types of things. And you get to the point, this is funded by the State Department, not the responsibility of the refugee, but just to pay the individual that is doing the work, vetting you and getting the documents together and, doing those types of things. They paid them to do that. The rest of it was on me. So I raised $10,000 to support them once they got here. So out of that, there's nothing left because I've used it for rent money, food, medical attention, psychological help, and all that to those young adults that are under my wing at this time. And I care for them like they really are mine. I can't. Man, it's bad, dude. But hiding them all the time too. I'm thinking about moving them right now to the south because it's so bad in Islamabad. If they get caught, man, they're illegal. So they get rolled up, put in a camp. And them girls, man, that oldest girl, she's already, that's 62 days in captivity, bro. She's missing for 2 weeks. Anyway, they're better off now than they were. I'm just trying to get them to a happy place, man. Happy place. But we'll get it done one way or the other. It's just unfortunate that the way things fell. The timeline and everything else. I couldn't believe. Welcome Corps, 8 months in the program, and that's right at the pinnacle of getting referred to IRAP, and then you're vetted and manifested, and that's a quick process. That's within like a week, 10 days. And we were right there on, right there, man. And bam, no go. And I'm like, Jesus, what are we going to do now? And, and during that time period again, I had friends that said, hey, I got a connection with Spain. We got a back door, and I do an embassy packet, a substantial packet, telling about the trauma, what they've gone through.
and which they are. They have been through some traumatic experiences. The brother wasn't with them during the captivity. It was just those two sisters. Ooh, thank God the youngest one didn't get touched. So I've had a lot of challenges with those children. I call them children, but they're young adults. The eldest is 22 now. Subtract 5 years, and that's how old they were when I got them. And I've done everything correctly, out in the open. I'm not hiding anything. It's just the timeline and the way things fell, with our government, the new president, and, the programs and different things. It's just been really hell for us to get through. I mean, we're still not there. Again, we have high hopes with the Canadian contacts. It looks good. We're going to have to wait and see what the lawyer says tomorrow. But, if anybody is willing to jump in the arena, I mean, Satan wouldn't walk in my shoes right now, I tell you that. But if you, anyone out there is listening, not just with your ears, but with your heart, come on. I'll embrace you as a brother, a sister, a friend, and we can share that joy when we free these kids and give them a future where they can have a life of freedom and not be worried about fear and oppression and education. They're gorgeous, I mean, they're very, it's just, that's another thing that works against them is their beauty. And somebody, and unfortunately that was taken advantage of early on, and it's been a hard process to get, that mind back to where it needs to be. I mean, it's still not right. I mean, we got sicknesses going on all the time. I just recently, the eldest child is sick. So, that's another thing. Got to have somebody go out and get medicine, and, they got to sit there and can't do anything. It's maddening. It really is. It's maddening for them. I know it is, because the brother, man, he's pacing the room, and, they start arguing amongst each other. Then I got to get involved, and then your brother, sister stuff. And I understand that too, after years of being that way, and not having the freedom, and then having to live the way they have to. But that's the best I could do. I wish I could do more, but thankfully, it's like renting that place. They don't rent to Afghans. So, the name on the list is mine. So if they do come and they see who's renting it, an American, oh, okay. You know what I'm saying? I've done things like that to try to keep them safe. And I don't like sharing a lot about where they are, who they are, that kind of stuff, because, all it takes is one loose lip and it's done.
Absolutely. Well, I hope there's someone listening can help, in whatever form that would be.
Yeah.
But I want to thank you so much for not only, coming on here and the interview itself, but also, the vulnerability element as well. I mean, this is what people need to hear, whether it's the plight of in this case, kids that you were trying to get from danger to somewhere safe, or the mental health side of our men and women in uniform as well. And this vulnerability from someone who has such a storied career on the front line. So I want to thank you so much for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
I appreciate you, James, and I'll be watching. And I really do appreciate being able to share my experiences and my thoughts with the audience. And again, I invite anyone in the world that listens to contact me. I more than welcome your friendship, and it'd be an honor to have you as a teammate.